Oh, wow. It's live streaming.
Okay, let's start. I would like to thank you for participating in our Penn Population Studies Colloquium series. We are excited to be able to continue this long-standing colloquium tradition of engaging in population science from experts across the world. Before I introduce the speaker, I'd like to remind you that this colloquium talk and Q&A will be recorded for the purpose of dissemination on the PSC YouTube channel. As you may have noticed, your video and audio is turned off. This is intentional. Please submit your questions through the question and answer tool. At the end of the talk, I will call on people to ask their question using their own voice. If you do not wish to be called on, please submit your questions anonymously. Thanks again for your participation and your attendance. I will now introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker is Emilce Santana. Emilce is a visiting assistant professor in the sociology department at Texas A&M University. She received her PhD in sociology very recently in 2019 from Princeton University with a specialization in population studies. Her dissertation is entitled, "Can Love Conquer All? Platonic and Romantic Relationships Across Ethno-Racial Lines in the US." But Emilce really learned sociology here at the University of Pennsylvania. She received her BA in sociology with a minor in French from the University of Pennsylvania, and she graduated summa cum laude with distinction in sociology. So she's actually we're very proud that she's one of our students. Despite her recent career and her being such a recent PhD, Emilce has produced several publications. Is White Always Right? Skin Color and Interdating Among Whites, that published in Race and Social Problems, and Situating Perceived Discrimination, How Do Skin Color and Acculturation Shape Perceptions of Discrimination Among Latinos, that came out in the Sociological Quarterly. Emilce has several work in progress, and she's introducing new methodologies to the study of racial interactions, and we're very happy and very proud to have her here today to present her research to us. So please help me welcome Emilce Santana.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And let me share the screen 1 second, hold on. Give me 1 moment. Okay, so hi everyone. And again, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm really excited to give this talk. I debated with myself whether to talk about this project in public venues because it's very much a work in progress. It's not fully baked. However, I decided to talk about this project because I think it's a really wonderful opportunity to receive feedback on this ongoing study. I'm still trying to make the full sense of the patterns I'm seeing in the data on how to move forward. Therefore, I'm tasking everyone who is listening to the talk to have the following question in mind. And it's, if I were in her shoes, what would I do next? Okay, so before I delve into the talk, I do want to go over the structure quite briefly. So I'm going to give an introduction about online dating in the US and how that relates to interethnic and interracial dating. And then I'm going to pose the question that I aim to answer within the study. And then I'll do a brief overview of the previous literature that serves as the foundation for the study and the hypotheses that I build off of that literature. I do want to give a thorough overview of the methods so you get an understanding of how I approach answering the question. And then we'll walk through the results. I lay out I discussed two possible future steps that I'm considering how to move forward with the study. And then I wrap up with the conclusion. Okay, so it may not surprise most of you when I say that online dating is becoming more and more commonplace. Just to give you a visual idea, since 2013, which honestly wasn't that long ago, it may feel like that, but it wasn't. We see that according to this graph, there have been some notable changes in the prevalence of online dating. So according to this graph from the Pew Research Center, the total percent of US adults who engage in online dating grew from 11 to 15% in the span of 2 years, 2013 to 2015. If you refer to a more updated graph based on data from 2019, that percentage doubled to 30%. There's also evidence that online dating is at the forefront for how couples form. According to this graph here, if we focus specifically on the red line with the triangles, we see that after 2010, online dating has outpaced other forms of how heterosexual couples meet. And for same-sex couples, online dating is especially popular. Now, this graph here isn't as recent as the previous one, but nonetheless, referring again to this line with the triangles, since early 2000s, online dating was the main avenue for couple formation, and the trend has steadily increased into 2010. So studying phenomena associated with online dating has implications for couple formation and more broadly family formation. That may especially be the case for interethnic and interracial dating. According to a working paper by Hergovich and Ortega, there's evidence that suggests that online dating has increased the prevalence of intermarriage in the US. Now, for the sake of simplicity, I will refer to dating across ethno-racial lines, meaning across large groups such as non-Latino Black, non-Latino White, and Latino as interdating. And referring again to the literature, there's research that shows that there's a relationship between a person's physical appearance and their dating habits and preferences. And there's evidence of this in both online dating as well as dating in general. So, for example, in a study by Feliciano and Robnet, they find that ethno-racial dating preferences among Latino online daters differ by racial appearance. Respondents who had a more white appearance had a skew towards white daters than other ethno-racial groups, while those that had a more Black appearance had a greater preference for Black daters over white daters. And in my own research, I find that when using a sample of undergraduates, an individual's skin color is associated with their likelihood of dating members of particular ethno-racial groups. I find evidence of this phenomenon across different ethno-racial groups, including white people when engaging in interdating. However, while there is work that suggests a relationship between a person's phenotype and their dating behavior, there's little understanding as to how an individual's phenotype affects another person's romantic interest in that individual. And there's evidence in the literature that a person's phenotype has a causal effect on other people's emotional reaction. To be more specific, according to Hagiwara et al., an individual having more Afrocentric features such as darker skin color and bigger lips has a negative effect on the affective reactions among white people. So having a better understanding of this puzzle with regards to dating could give us insight into a causal mechanism that may determine which group members have a comparatively easier time crossing ethno-racial boundaries, and thus in the long term, possibly reshaping the contours of ethno-racial groups and the social distance between these groups. And while phenotype can include a whole range of features, I focus on skin color. Skin color may be especially relevant, which I already suggested a bit early in the slide when mentioning my own work. Moreover, skin color is charged with various connotations and stereotypes. So there's a great deal of social weight to skin color. So I've laid out why online dating is relevant to the study of population dynamics and its relationship to interdating, and that a person's phenotype may have implications for the likelihood of engaging in intergroup relationships. So broadly, the study that I'm going to talk about today addresses the following question. What is the causal effect of skin color when engaging in online interdating? Now, specifically, I choose to focus on non-Latino Black people and how the skin color of non-Latino Black people may have a causal effect on their desirability or dateability as determined by those who aren't Black. And to give you a very brief preview of the results were unexpected in that it doesn't follow the hypotheses I constructed based on the literature. I find that medium skin color seems to have the most positive effect on desirability ratings. Okay. Now, referring to the previous literature, there are various implications to interdating. For one, the increase of interdating and more broadly, romantic intergroup relationships can be both a sign that ethno-racial dynamics are changing within a given area, but also can lead to more changes to ethno-racial relations. In the previous literature, there's evidence that romantic intergroup relationships, as well as certain types of exposure to other ethno-racial groups among white people, is associated with reduced social distance to other ethno-racial groups. Well, logically speaking, interdating may in the long term lead to greater levels of cohabitation across ethno-racial groups, intermarriage, and perhaps even a more multiracial and multi-ethnic population. Biologically, I'm referring to the fact that without dating someone, the likelihood of cohabitating and or forming a family are virtually non-existent. And of course, there are exceptions, such as the major one being arranged marriages. And within the immigrant integration literature, intermarriage is treated as a barometer for the integration of a minority group into the majority. While this body of literature has focused primarily on marriages, which is an institutionalized relationship, more casual relationships such as dating and even friendships may give us a unique look into how deep-rooted certain ethno-racial boundaries are, by virtue that these relationships tend to be more low stakes than a formalized relationship such as a marriage. Okay, so when considering interdating in the US, one thing to keep in mind is that ethno-racial groups do not have the same social standing. And by that, I mean that ethno-racial groups have particular levels of power that can translate into social authority and privilege. For those who study race and ethnicity, I'm certain that this is a no-duh statement. But hear me out. From a historical perspective, US race relations were predominantly a binary hierarchy in which Black people were at the bottom and while white people were at the top. And I would say that remains true today. But our current race relations are far from a binary at this point. Two prominent minority groups, Asians and Latinos, tend to be viewed as foreigners more so than Black people. Yet when looking at outcomes such as intermarriage with white people, the rates tend to be higher for Asians and Latinos more so than for Black people. Therefore, I would argue that these groups are approximately in the middle between Black and white people. The ethno-racial hierarchy is quite evident when looking at trends in interdating. On one hand, there is in general there is a skew towards ethno-racial homophily, meaning that across different groups, there's a tendency to prefer to date one's own ethno-racial group. On the other hand, when looking at cross-ethno-racial dating, white people tend to be seen as the most desirable and Black people as the least. Now, a major physical feature of race is skin color. According to a study by Cynthia Feliciano, the greatest determinant of perceived race is skin color. Especially for those who are dark skinned, they're almost consistently rated as Black. And skin color in the US is associated with a range of social meanings, especially status among different ethno-racial minority groups. Lighter skin color relative to darker skin color tends to connote higher status because of its proximity to whiteness. It can be viewed as a sign of purity, civility, and following dominant beauty standards, while darker skin color tends to be associated with lower status because it insinuates non-whiteness, especially Blackness, lower class, savagery, and ugliness. So just as there are various status connotations to particular skin tones, there are stereotypes tied to different shades, with reference specifically to Black people. While lighter skin color may imply higher status, it can also suggest inauthenticity. Those with light skin color may have their Blackness questioned more often. Moreover, there are gendered stereotypes of skin color. Light skin color insinuates femininity, which may lead to light-skinned Black men to be seen as less masculine and therefore possibly less desirable in certain circumstances, while the opposite may be the case for Black women. Alternatively, dark skin color is associated with masculinity and sexuality, which may at times help Black men seem more desirable, at least superficially, and may make Black women seem less feminine. Furthermore, there's evidence that those who are medium range skin tone have unique experiences relative to those who are light, or dark. More specifically, according to Russell et al.'s survey of the previous literature, medium tone Black people tend to have more self-esteem, probably because they avoid the additional stereotypes that lighter and darker Black people tend to face. It may be the case that they're seen as the correct amount of Black, in that they're Black enough, more so than lighter skinned Black people, but not too Black like dark skinned Black people. So when it comes to skin color and romantic relationships, there's a body of work that illustrates association between a person's skin color and their partner status. More specifically, lighter skin color is associated with partners' outcomes, such as their level of education, occupational prestige, and even their own skin color. Specifically, when focusing on skin color and interdating, based on my own work using the National Longitudinal Survey of Freshmen, I make the following argument. And I'll divide it into smaller chunks so you can better follow it. That the role of a person's skin color in the likelihood of them interdating depends on the relative levels of social status of the ethno-racial backgrounds of the people that date one another. To be more specific, to give a more tangible explanation, lighter skin color is associated with the greater likelihood of lower status ethno-racial group members to date people from higher status groups, while darker skin color is associated with a greater likelihood of higher status ethno-racial group members to date lower status groups. And to give you an even better sense of that argument, here's a graph that shows the results from that research. So focusing on this graph, remember how 2 slides ago I said that US ethno-racial relations are based on a hierarchy in which Black people are at the bottom, white people are at the top, and Asians and Latinos are approximately in the middle. Well, we see in this graph here, well, if we focus on this graph, in particular on this blue line, this blue solid line, that represents the predicted probability of Black men to date white people. And we see that with darker skin color, there's a lower predicted probability. But we see the opposite. We see the relationship is reversed when referring to these 2 bottom lines here, these 2 dashed lines, the green and the lavender ones. And those represent the predicted probabilities of Latino men dating Black people and Asian women dating Black people. Okay, so taking all that I've spoken about thus far, here's my first hypothesis. that lighter skin color relative to darker skin color will have a positive effect on desirability ratings. I decided to focus on the experiences of one ethno-racial group, non-Latino Black people, because of their social position within the US. It simplifies the hypothesis in that given their lowest position within an ethno-racial hierarchy, the effect of skin color on desirability may work in a similar fashion for different types of non-Black people who are rating the profiles. However, we should consider the fact that I'm not using observational data, which is influenced by an array of unknown factors such as compatibility between partners. The alternative hypothesis considers how for skin color, especially when it comes to an experiment, that just features pictures of people with little contextual information, it may be the case that stereotypes may upend what I have found in my previous work, specifically when it comes to men. It's possible that darker skin color at a superficial first glance may have a positive effect on desirability, specifically among Black men. So moving on to the methodology. The main instrument for this study is a survey. It's a survey experiment. I took 6 pictures from the Chicago Face database, specifically of 3 men and 3 women. I used a program called PicMonkey to manipulate the skin tones of each picture so that there would be 3 versions of each individual. By that meaning there's a dark version, a medium version, and a light version. So out of the 18 possible profiles, each respondent is shown 6 profiles. 3 of those profiles feature women, and 3 of them feature men of different skin tones. I designed in such a way that each respondent saw a version of each of the 6 individuals chosen for the study. So there are no repeats of the same person with a different skin tone. And I also list out the questions that are the basis for the outcomes in the study. I have 3 outcomes, and I'll read the questions. So would you send a message, the first question being, would you send a message to show interest in the individual in the profile? The second one is, would you respond to a message from the individual in the profile, assuming that the individual expresses interest in you? And then the final one, number 3, would you be willing to meet the individual in the profile in person, assuming you have good rapport via initial messages? I also list out the options for responses to each of the questions. The response options are the same for each question. I should say before I continue that for the main analyses, I include responses from people who rate profiles, even if the responses don't match with their gender and sexuality. I ask for information on both of those things. And I'm not entirely certain how to interpret that behavior. I do make it a point to state that the study, I tell all the respondents that the study is about online dating, and I limit the responses to people who in the manipulation check answer the correct number of women and men in the profiles. And here I show you the prompt that all the respondents see before they start rating the profiles. Okay, I conducted 3 pre-tests. The first one, I chose popular baby names from the 90s, and I asked respondents to rate how ethno-racially neutral they were. Since names can signal things such as race and class, I wanted to use really common names for at least one round of data collection to see if that would skew the results. In particular, people's perceptions of the profiled people's race. I also did a round of data collection using stereotypically Black names, as well to see if the results differed. Each name is associated with one particular face. So whether the picture has been darkened or lightened, their name stays the same. I did a pretest for hobbies, which I also integrate into the profiles to give it a slightly more realistic look to the profiles rather than just having a picture. Um, I did want to throw off people a little bit by choosing hobbies that are similarly rated in terms of how likely would respondents state someone who does that particular hobby. But I chose 2 hobbies that lean more towards extroversion, 2 that lean more towards introversion, and 2 that were mixed, a balance between extroversion and introversion. So for men's profiles, they received 1 of each category, and the same went for women's profiles. And each hobby was tied to a particular profile person, similar to names. Lastly, I did a pretest. I did a pretest in which I asked respondents to rate the skin color of the pictures to make sure that there was consistency across the pictures. And I asked about the perceived race and ethnicity of the profile pictures. Even among the lightest pictures, the majority of the respondents, the responses, excuse me, were that the pictures were perceived as non-Latino Black. And here I show the range of averages by skin color category. So if we were to round the numbers, dark has a rating of 10, which is on this scale would be here. Medium, it's a range between 7 and 8, which is between these 2 categories. And then light, the categories fall between 5 and 6. Okay. And also just to give you all a sense of how the profiles ended up looking like, here's one example of one person and how their profiles differed by skin color. And here's one for men. Yeah. So moving on to the modeling strategy. The unit of analysis is by response to a particular question for a specific picture. So for a given respondent, they can rate as many as 6 profiles. And so for a particular question, such as, what is the likelihood of you messaging this person to show interest? So a person could respond to that question for as many as 6 profiles. Therefore, 6 cases could be tied to one person, to one respondent, excuse me. I use ordinal logit models that have random effects by respondent and fixed effects by profile person. For the fixed effects, I mean that I incorporate dummy variables for each of the people that are profiled, so that the effect of other features beyond skin color don't affect the skin color results. Here I list the control variables for the study. I do want to clarify a couple of the variables that I add here. For example, network, that is a dummy variable that distinguishes people who between people who had who had different responses and those who state that their friendship network is predominantly Black. And interdating is similar in that that's an indicator for people who stated that that they have dated Black people in the past. And then the dummy variable for batch, that's an indicator to distinguish between the 2 rounds of collection that I did, one that had ethno-racially neutral names and one that had stereotypically Black names. As for the data itself, I sourced my respondents from mTurk, which is an online crowdsourcing platform to recruit workers, meaning respondents. And yes, there are pros and cons to using mTurk as a sample. It's not necessarily representative of the greater US population. It tends to be more educated and white, but it's a quick and efficient way to collect data, especially when it comes to a survey experiment. Impactful research on race and ethnicity has come out of using mTurk, such as Maria Bascad's work, just to give one example. Also, according to a 2014 study by Weinberg et al., experimental results based on an MTurk sample were comparable to a population-based sample. I sample only non-married MTurkers who passed the attention checks, meaning that they supplied the correct number of men profiles and women profiles. I also limited to respondents who perceive the people in the profiles as mostly Black or all Black. I focus on people who are not aware of what's going on in the study. And not too many people noticed that the study was about skin color. The most common responses included, this study is about race or racism, and also something vague like this study is about dating preferences. So putting all these limitations onto the sample leave me with 314 eligible participants. For the purposes of this talk, I show the results for respondents who are not Black. But if anyone wants to look at the descriptive statistics or the main results for the broader sample, I do have them at the end of the PowerPoint. I decide to only show the skin color coefficients for the multivariate analyses, and I translate them into odds ratios. So to give a very, very brief overview of odds ratios, and I'm oversimplifying it because they're especially complicated to interpret when it comes to ordinal logit models. But to be very brief, a coefficient above 1 means that a unit increase in the independent variable is associated with an increase in the odds of the outcome, while coefficient below 1 means that a unit increase in the independent variable is associated with a decrease in the odds of the outcome. And the outcomes for this study go from the lowest number, 1, being the most negative rating, to the highest number, 5, being the highest rating. So with that being said, here is the first section of the results for the non-Black sample. Oh, I see I have a question here. Oh, that's a comment. Okay, I'll respond to this later, but thank you. Okay, so here, so the outcome here is sending a message to indicate interest. The 3 columns are the same model. I just switched out the reference category to see any differences between the 3 categories, the 3 skin color categories. And what the table shows here is that there seems to be a statistically significant difference between the light pictures and the medium picture and the medium tone pictures. But the pattern doesn't follow that predicted by hypothesis 1. It seems to follow more hypothesis 2, the alternative hypothesis, in that medium skin color relative to light skin color has a positive effect on the outcome of sending a message to express interest. However, there is no statistically significant difference between the light and dark category, between the light and dark categories, or between the medium and dark categories. And to give a visual of the results, to understand more of the magnitude, I calculated the predicted probabilities of the outcome variable by skin color. So each line here represents a particular response category. So looking at this graph, for the most part, the differences between the skin color categories are actually quite minimal. You see that for the most part, they're flat, the lines are flat. But the most notable difference is the category very unlikely, which is represented by this blue line right here. So there's a 3 percentage point difference between the light category and the dark category. I mean, not light, the light category and the medium category, excuse me. There's a predicted probability of 29% for the light category and a 26% predicted probability of 26% for the medium category. As for the second outcome, which is responding to a message, I find a similar trend in that medium skin color has a positive effect on ratings relative to light skin color. However, in addition to that, I found, which is quite unexpected to me, that medium skin color also seems to have a positive effect on ratings relative to dark skin color. So there seems to be a nonlinear effect here. And to give a visual representation of those results, we move to predicted probabilities. So if we focus on the gray line right here, that represents the category very likely, response category very likely. And medium has the highest predicted probability in this response category, with a predicted probability of 23%. And light has the lowest predicted probability with 19%, and dark is in the middle at 20%. And then the opposite category, that's the blue line, that represents very unlikely. Medium has the lowest predicted probability at 16%, and light at the highest with 19%, and dark at 18%. So the last outcome is willingness to meet the profile person. And again, we see that medium has a positive effect on ratings relative to the light category, to the light skin color category, which is statistically significant at the 0.05 level. Well, there's a marginally significant effect when comparing medium to dark. But once more, there's evidence of a nonlinear relationship, even though for the comparison between medium and dark, it's a bit weaker. Translating those results into predicted probabilities, we refer to the medium line, we refer to the gray line that represents the response category very likely. Medium has the highest predicted probability at 22%. Light has the lowest at 19%, and dark is in the middle at 20%. Now, before I continue, I divide the sample by responses based on women's pictures and those based on men's pictures. But I'm only going to show the results that are based on men's profiles, because the results featuring women's profiles, I don't find a statistically significant difference across the three outcomes. And I'm still working on theorizing as to why that is. I do have the results at the end of the PowerPoint in case anyone's interested in looking at them. But for the purposes of time, I'd rather just not talk about it in depth right now. Okay. So as the results for men's profiles, here we see results for the outcome sending a message to express interest. And the results here do follow one of the hypotheses, in that darker it has a positive effect. We see that both medium and dark skin color have a positive effect when compared to light skin color, and both are significant at the 0.01 level. He says, what differences do you find when you
Emilce, we're gonna take the questions at the end, so you can. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Thank you. I'm just like, these are great questions, but okay, thank you. Okay, thank you so much for that, Emilio. Thank you. Okay. So according to the predicted probabilities, visually, when comparing medium to dark, we see that the results are virtually identical. The lines are flat. Yet when looking at the probabilities for light, we see the difference. For example, the blue line, that represents the response category very unlikely. There's a 7 percentage point difference between light and medium and dark, with light versus medium and dark. Light has a predicted probability of 35%, and medium dark has a predicted probability of 28%. And the orange line, that represents the response categories somewhat likely. And light has the lowest predicted probability at 15%, and medium and dark are rated higher at or have a higher predicted probability at 19%. So for the outcome responding to a message, we can see the statistically significant difference between light versus medium, but none when it comes to dark. And medium relative to light has a positive effect. So in terms of predicted probabilities, we see the blue line that represents the response category, very unlikely. Medium has the lowest predicted probability at 16%. And that's a 5 percentage point difference between medium and light, with light having the highest predicted probability at 21%. And then the gray line, that's the opposite of the blue line. That represents the response very likely. Medium has the highest predicted probability at 15%, and light has the lowest at 11%. Lastly, there's evidence of a nonlinear result between skin color and the outcome meeting a person, or willingness to meet the profiled person in person. In that medium skin color seems to have the most positive effect relative to light and dark, but especially in comparison to light. And once more, translating the results into predicted probabilities, the blue line represents the response very unlikely, and there's a 6 percentage point difference between light and medium, in that medium has a predicted probability of 18% and light has a predicted probability of 24%, and dark is in the middle at 22%. And then the gray line, which represents the response category, very likely, that the medium category has the highest predicted probability at 14%, and light has the lowest at 10%, and dark at 11%. Okay, so moving forward, there are a couple of options I'm considering, and I'll bring up two. The biggest flaw in the design of this study is that I harvested pictures of people of medium tone Black people, and I didn't alter the medium tone ones. Given how similarly the particular pictures were rated, I didn't think to manipulate those. But now that I'm getting the nonlinear results, I wonder whether the results are being driven by the fact that the medium pictures were not doctored. There's the possibility that respondents are unknowingly or knowingly picking up on that fact. I will say that none of the respondents, even those who realized that the study was about skin color, none of them said that the pictures looked doctored, that they looked fake. But it may be because I didn't prompt them to mention something about the pictures. So that may be the case there. Second, in talking to colleagues, some of them pointed out that perhaps there's a particular subgroup that's perceiving these pictures in a different way for other people. And I agree with that belief. I'm currently looking through the literature, in particularly reading up on Nikki Kana's work. And her focus is on biracials. And I'm referring specifically to her book on racial identity among biracial people. In one of her chapters, she explores the role of social networks and exposure to white people and to white people and to Black people, and how that helps in developing beliefs and attitudes towards these people, towards these groups. So I did collect data on interactions with Black people, specifically friendship networks and dating Black people. So here's some of the results for the interaction effects between the treatment, which is the skin color of the pictures, and exposure to Black people. And I don't switch out the reference categories here. Each model represents a separate model. Now, interpreting interaction effects in general can be a little complicated, and that's especially the case for ordinal logit models. But and I don't have predicted probabilities for these outcomes, but the direction of the interaction effect can give us a sense of the relationship that's going on with the interaction effect, right? So if we look here, if you focus on these two lines, especially the last line that I'm moving my mouse over, there is evidence that dating Black people may make respondents more susceptible to rate more favorably the profiles that feature people who are more stereotypically Black, which is having dark skin color. And we see that pattern again when interacting skin color and a mostly Black network, or having a mostly Black friendship network. Okay, so in conclusion, the results show that the skin color of profiled individuals, specifically of Black people, does have an effect on how desirable they are perceived by non-Black people. More specifically, having medium skin color seems to put profiled pictures at an advantage, profiled people at an advantage, excuse me, especially when compared to light-skinned people. The results inform us of a mechanism that can affect who is most likely to cross ethno-racial boundaries within the context of online dating, which is an increasingly common way to meet romantic partners. So if the results were to be taken at face value, meaning that the results are not an artifact of how the pictures have been altered, I would say that the results also, show how the effect of quickly viewing someone of a particular skin color is quite distinct from my previous research, which focused on experiences of those with particular skin tones using observational data. It could be the case that the discrepancy in this study versus my previous research is because the previous research was capturing perhaps the resonance chemistry with other people, while the results here may show the possible effect of stereotypes, with medium skin color being more preferable, possibly because it signals being Black enough, but not too Black. As with any study, there are limitations. An obvious one is using sample M-Turkers, which is a predominantly white sample. And this is an avenue for future research. I don't know what's the logic behind how respondents are choosing to rate profiles. I theorize it may have to do something with the lack of negative stereotypes for medium tone Black people, but I'm not sure if that's a conscious or non-conscious bias. And I do have ideas I haven't finished with this one, but like any researcher, I already have ideas for future projects. One is exploring the role of Afro-Latinidad vis-a-vis non-Latino Black people, being non-Latino Black in dating. And also the role of signaling different ethno-racial backgrounds for ambiguous looking daters. Okay, so that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emilce, very much for very interesting presentations. And now we're going to move to the question and answer portion of the presentation. Michael Lachansky, you have a question. Do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi.
Oh, hello. I thought it was great. I just wanted to point you to some experiments done by Anastasopoulos.
Yeah.
The chapter doing very similar manipulations to look at political effects, a little different from what you're doing, but the experimental design is very similar, and it's from 2014, 15-ish, even uses mechanical Turk. That's one. And then two, I was wondering if you could reweight the data that you get, because I see that there's only like 25 or 35 Black people in the data set. It might be a little bit better if you could reweight it so it's more representative of the US population in their 20s, or even best would be dating population in their 20s, if you could find out what it is. I don't know if you can, but I think that'd be super interesting.
Okay, sample yield. Can you repeat the name that you mentioned earlier?
Jason Anastasopoulos.
Thank you so much.
No stress.
I'm writing it down. I have another laptop. That's why I'm like this.
Well, I think this is going to be on YouTube afterwards, but no big deal.
Okay, we have a next question by Wendy Roth.
I think I briefly saw it and I was like, oh, it's something about different groups.
Yeah, I mean, you actually touched on this in your conclusions, but my initial question was about differences between the ethno-racial groups of the raters. And at the time that you gave the presentation, I didn't realize that it was a mostly white sample. I believe you said that the sample was all non-Black, but there's been some research that you're probably aware of, and if not, you might be interested in some of the work by Ginetta Candelario, which focuses on Dominicans, but finds that among Dominican women, at least, they're actually for sort of more medium.
You're breaking up a little.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. I was like, I want to hear. That's why you're breaking up a little.
Yeah. So Ginetta Candelario, in her work on Dominicans, finds that there is a preference among women for appearances that look brown. So not white, not Black, but somewhere in the middle. And so it's possible that if some of your raters were Latino, it could be picking up on that preference for a look which seems more Latino than more white or Black. But that's probably not the case if you don't have that many Latinos in your sample. I mean, you asked about next steps, and I do think that the issue of selecting medium skin toned photos from the Chicago database survey is probably something you may want to work on, because if you were to go and get some light skin tone photos and some dark skin tone photos and manipulate them the same way, you could see whether the manipulation is actually leading to people being less likely to want to date them, and that to me seems like a very likely scenario. But also, if you can explore anything about differences among the respondents, I think that would be a really positive step too.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thanks.
Do you want to answer now, Emilce? You want to have a few comments about that? Or no?
So no, I have explored within the sample beyond just I have looked at the differences between Black and non-Black. I did an interaction effect there, and I do have at the end. But I also remember doing a sub-analysis for the just white sample, and the results are very similar. But could I look at do an interaction effect or perhaps look at the distribution for the non-Black sample? Would that be a good idea? Yes. And did I do that specifically for the non-Black sample? No, I didn't.
The next question is by Pilar. Pilar, ¿alguna response?
Hi, yeah, great presentation. Thank you so much. I have two quick questions. One is about design, and I was just curious if, and maybe I missed this, I apologize, but if there was any way in which you manipulated which pictures they would show up first than others, and if there's anything there that you can leverage also to further explore your findings. And the other question is just, generally more curious to hear about the gender results, both what they are and how are you thinking about interpreting them. Thanks so much.
Okay, I'm really happy you asked that. So there's a great deal of randomization involved in the study. Not only in terms of which pictures are selected for a particular person to view, but yes, the ordering is randomized. So I wouldn't say that the ordering is having an effect here. Like, oh, everyone saw the medium picture first. That wasn't the case. So there's randomization involved. And what's the second question?
Oh, just about gender. You mentioned that the results are very different by sex, gender, and that you're still thinking about how to interpret those.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, I can show you the results if you would like for the women's profiles. What's trick with the difficulty in doing an interaction effect for the gender of the profile pictures is that I have fixed effects. So an interaction effect for the gender of the profile people wouldn't be possible. Well, it is possible, but then other factors like how a person looks may be influencing those results.
Thank you. Jerry Berman.
Again, thank you for an interesting presentation. My first comment before I saw Michael's was along his lines. That is, it'd be useful to compare your population with a population of interest. He suggested some possibilities, and then he suggested going further and doing the reweighting, which I think is a good idea. The other thought I had is to go further on the interactions. And among those, for example, would seem interested to know whether there were significant interactions with schooling attainment or along the lines that Pilar suggested with gender. Thanks again.
Thank you. I didn't do an interaction effect, or at least I haven't checked that out between the skin color treatment and the educational background of those who are rating. But if I'm just based on what I remember from the models, the full models, there wasn't a strong educational background result. Or not statistically, not for the most part, not statistically significant.
So I think those would be interesting results to report. Likewise with gender. I mean, insignificance is not uninteresting. It's important.
Oh.
Okay, I have a question, Emilce. I'm going back to the initial motivation for your study and the changing in dating, intermarriage, and the potential for mixture in the US population that online dating can bring. And I want to hear your comments about how you feel about that. What do your findings say about that? The US compared to other contexts is, highly segregated, limits, school segregation, neighborhood segregation gets limited interaction between people of different backgrounds. There's some evidence that that's might be changing, and maybe the online market can be changing that. But you find there's a gender cleavage. So what do your findings say about that?
Okay, let me see if I got the question right. So you're asking, what do my findings say about how the market is changing?
How the interracial dating, interracial marriage is affected by the online dating. Is it really changing? The US high degree of segregation in the marriage market, is the interracial, is the dating, the online dating mitigating that level of segregation?
Well, I actually there was an original iteration of this talk. I had to cut it out because that part of the introduction was really long. But there's Rosenfeld shows that relationships that start from online dating tend to marry quicker. There's about 50% take about 3 to 4 years. About 50% of the group from his study married within 3 to 4 years, while those that meet offline, 50% took about over 10 years to get married. So I do think that, yes, that online dating, especially now with the virus and the pandemic, how are people meeting nowadays? Since I'd say the skew is moving more towards online dating, and it's being pushed also by the pandemic. And I do mention about that that working paper about how the rise in online dating is associated with intermarriage, with the increasing prevalence of intermarriage. So there's that. Beyond that work, I'm not entirely sure if there's other works that look at that relationship between intermarriage, between online dating and intermarriage, like it increased the prevalence. I mean, from what I've seen, I know their websites, there are apps that brag about, oh, well, you know, we're diminishing racial divides. That I have seen that. So yeah, that would be my response thus far.
Oh, okay. Okay, there's one final question, but it's mainly methodological, and maybe you can probably answer privately. We run out of time. It's over 1 o'clock, so please help me thank Emilce for a very interesting presentation, and please reach out if you have any more questions or comments. It's great to have you back, Emilce, and so we very much enjoy your talk. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody,
Bye.
and have a good day. Yeah.